again, and welcome to part 2 of our course on the organisation and structure of the Knights Templar Church. So I'm Reverend Steve Chriscole, and we are going to look today, well, the title for today's lecture is called Soldiers of Christ. Soldiers of Christ. So let us get started then. In the previous video, I gave you a basic introduction to the Knights Templar Church. What did we see? Well, we saw the tenets of the church from two perspectives, really, both from a Christian and a Templar perspective. I told you something about me as well. So I know that you should have already, before you started this, you should have completed the course called Christian Basics. So I'm not going to go over that again. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss in more detail what it means to be Templar. All right? So we will, of course, be thinking about our Christian nature, and of course that underpins everything that we do, doesn't it? But, you know, like as the original Templars, they called themselves soldiers of Christ. Well, so shall we, yeah? But you know, I wonder, what does it actually mean to be a soldier of Christ? Well, I think to get that notion of that, we need to just take a little look at something of what it was like to be a Templar back in the 12th century or 13th century. So the original Knights, the Templar, they were regarded as the most highly trained and effective group of soldiers in their time. Now, the reason for this isn't that hard to grasp once you know one or two salient facts. First of all, their lives were totally dedicated to perfecting their fighting skills. So their fighting skills were swordsmanship. They would use the long staff, the pike, what we call a pike or halberd, but it was more like a spear actually, rather than a halberd. Halberds are more for a foot soldier. The spear is a mounted soldier's weapon, and the shield, obviously. So they also had a long dagger. And that was basically it. So the horsemanship as well. Now, the horse wasn't necessarily a weapon, but you use the horse in battle as well. So horsemanship to a very high standard. Okay. Now, as the knights went through the years, they sort of gained more and more armor until eventually they were sort of fully clad, really. So to ride a horse with that lot on and be able to fight is no small task indeed. Anyway, so fighting skills. Dedicated to that, and they were very good at that. They had the leadership. Well, it had a different approach. When they were eventually sort of purloined is perhaps the right word by the Jerusalem king, and they wanted them to change their remit, as it were. Originally they were protecting the people coming on pilgrimage. What they were eventually sort of usurped, perhaps is a better word, and placed into formations for battle when they were fighting against the Saracens and so on. Now, the Templars operated a totally different way of fighting than your average Crusader soldier, which came from basically all manner of training from all different parts of Europe and beyond. So you had all sorts of stuff, but the Templars, they trained to fight in a very specific way. What they did, and I'm not going to expand on that because you can learn about it in other places. Essentially, they learned to fight as a unit together, whereas all the other troops that were around, they didn't do that. Okay, so enough said. Another thing that we need to appreciate about the Templars as they became a Templar. How did they become a Templar? Well, they were expected to have extremely arduous training, and of course they had to be chosen as well, didn't they? How did they get chosen for that? Well, there's a story, but they had to go through this very, very arduous training. With all you can imagine, they may have had skills to begin with. In fact, they would be expected to have certain fighting skills. but they had to prove themselves, if you like, to even get entry into the training program, right? Now, their military training, in conjunction with their strict, at the time, Roman Catholic Christian ethos, it literally forged their characters in both physical and mental fortitude. So they were to become, and they were in training to become monks, monks, weren't they? And well, let's face it, if you were going to try and find people like that today, you're just not going to find them. They don't exist anymore. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. We have special forces in all the major countries in the world. Yes, SAS, SEAL teams, Delta teams, goodness knows what else. Yeah, we've got all of that. But who are they fighting for? Are they monks? Are they fighting for God to protect Christian? No, they're not doing any of that. They are fighting for themselves. They're fighting for their countries. They're fighting for a specific purpose, which is whatever it might be. But they're not fighting for Christ. I mean, you know that special forces they're the best at what they do, but they're just paid men. They may have strong ideological beliefs about why they're fighting for their country, but they're still paid soldiers, nevertheless, and fighting for an ideal which is not anything to do with God. Now, what's the difference between them and us? Well, the Templars, let's put it that way, not us, but in the past, the Templars were fighting for God and his people. Yeah? So, I hope you kind of get a sense of and appreciate something of the life of the original Templars. All right? Now, having got that, hopefully, you've got some picture in your mind of these poor guys. I'm going to do a plug, all right? There's a TV series which is part history and it's part made up, part fantasy, I was going to say. And the name of the thing has completely escaped me, but it's a good watch, simply because it shows you a lot of the hardships that these guys went through. The name will come to me later, probably. Okay, but TV series about Templar Knights, and the name escapes me, but never mind. Okay, so what about the fighting? I mentioned in a previous lecture, I mentioned about my fighting training. Okay, now let's look at what a Templar has to do. Number one, first thing, hand-to-hand combat. See, most people have got no idea about or understanding of fighting methods, except what you see on TV. Okay, and 95 or more % of that is just rubbish. Okay, it's all made up junk. Okay, medieval fighting was organized and just as deadly as any other method. So striking skills were really important because the knights were on horseback. You can get knocked off your horse, so now you're on foot. Have you got your sword? Maybe. You might have lost your sword in battle. What are you left with? A dagger? You can fight with that, okay? But when it comes down to it, you still need hand-to-hand skills. So striking skills aimed at vulnerable points, because you may be looking at armor. Grappling skills, okay? Grappling with an opponent. Very important, because, a soldier with no weapon to hand, what does he use? He's left with simply the ability to grapple with his opponent. Okay, so my own experience tells me something about how the training in these areas are extremely grueling, and in real life, not just the training, but the reality of using these skills, it's bloody, it's sweaty, and it's hard work. Very. Okay, so that's hand to hand. Okay, we could talk a lot more about that, but I won't bore you to death with that. Next thing, Weapons. Well, the first thing was that they had a broadsword. When I say broadsword, it was the Templar sword, which is a two-edged, sort of three-foot long bladed, double-edged sword. Long sword, essentially, is what it's known as. Now, it could be used with two hands, or it could be used with one hand. It was long, it was straight, it was double-edged, and initially it's used sword against sword. That's its ploy, but not necessarily. It can be used sword against any other weapon. And they had to learn how to fight against a sword, how to fight against somebody with a pike, or any other improvised, and also how to deal with the shield as well. So you need to have intensive knowledge of sword technique. And I'm not much of a one with medieval type swords. My background is in Japanese swordsmanship, so it's a totally different kind of combat. But even so, the use of, I was watching something recently, and the use of the longsword in battle is quite an interesting thing. It's different from a Japanese sword. It's got a long sword guard for a start off, which a Japanese sword doesn't have. How you use that is a very important thing in medieval swordsmanship, but again, I'm not an expert in that. So, okay, so you need that, but with all swordsmanship, you need something called footwork. If you can't dance, you've had it, right? You need to be able to learn footwork. Very important. You need a good strong upper body strength. Well, basic general all round strength really for swordsmanship. But you also need to be able to think strategically. Sword fighting isn't just ding, 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 ding like you see on the TV. No, there's a lot more to it than that. Okay. Anyway, so next you've got the lance, pole arm, or spear, if you want to call it that. Now, as a trained and mounted soldier, the lance was a devastating weapon because of the length. It's got a reach and a very sharp tip on the end. And so, yes, you've seen how the lance is used. I mean, if you've watched the movie about the defense at Thermopylae by the Spartans against the Persians, if you watch the 300, you'll see just how effective in the right hands a spear can be and how it can be effectively used. So again, these are mounted soldiers using the spear on horseback, and they basically are using it in a charged specific formation all together. As I said, they work together as a group. So it was a frontline attack weapon, and it can be used obviously for defense as well, but they would be using it for attack, I can tell you that. Okay, so it's generally been used when charging forward, usually as a small but tight group to penetrate enemy defenses. Okay. Next weapon that they would carry is a dagger. Now, as I said, it's specifically designed as a penetrating weapon. It's a long, thin, bladed weapon, again with a quite a wide hilt, and some skill and dexterity is needed in the use of that too. So fighting techniques, how to use that by itself or in conjunction with a sword. So yeah, there's a lot here, isn't there? You can see how when you build up the things that they have to learn, it's quite a lot. Now, if you lose like I said before, if you lose your sword in battle or it gets broken or something, then the dagger's your next best thing. Use that in conjunction with hand-to-hand fighting skills, then, Okay, so the next and last thing I have to talk about today is about horsemanship. Now, I'm not a horsey person. I've never ridden a horse in my life, so I'm not qualified to talk about horsemanship, so I'm not going to. But all I'm going to say to you is that the Templars, they initially always fought from horseback. They were knights, and a knight had a horse. Okay, so they needed excellent riding skills. Now, I've seen stuff about riding horses and this, that, and the other, and yes, it does take quite a bit of skill to learn how to control this animal, to get it to do the various things that you want. But not only that, the horse needs to be trained as well. Okay, you're riding that horse So don't you need to train the horse to do what you want it to do under certain circumstances? Of course you do. So there's another job for the Templar, isn't it? Or possibly his squire, in conjunction with. And then, of course, how do you use that horse in battle? Well, battle skills, formation skills, etc., etc. Again, I'm not a horsey person, so I can't really comment on that. But just bear in mind, it is a skill set all by itself. How to ride a horse effectively in battle. So there's just a little bit of an insight, really, into the fighting skills and the training that's needed for a fully fledged Templar knight of old. Hardly surprising, is it, that these guys were pretty good at what they did. Now, their training from start to finish would be no less than 2 years, probably more, depending on their ability and the particular priory that they worked in, I suppose. But generally speaking, about 2 years. Now, I'm going to say right now, do I need to, again, that the Knights Templar Church, us, we are not looking for people to engage in battle, all right? Not this kind of battle. But, you know, those men and women who've learned modern variations of such skills will, I know from my own experience, have gained something of a mindset of a warrior. And something that's drummed into you in terms of my own karate training is the sheer determination not to give up. That's the military ethos. Not so much learned from being in the Air Force, because that was easy peasy compared to what I was doing in my spare time. Okay, but yeah, it is about determination and never giving up. That's what we need. So there you go. So now that's the fighting side of the Templar. What about the Templar as a monk? What about that? Well, as if the military training wasn't difficult enough, this initiate, into training, he needed to live a highly disciplined life. And so, well, if you were to look at the full Templars rules, not the ones that we use, but I'm talking about the original ones, I haven't seen all of them, because I think there are 72 rules altogether, something like that. And they go into your life in absolute detail. You basically you know, picking your nose, not that he's not allowed to. Really, it was so intrusive into your life that the rule controlled every single aspect of your life within the priory. Very restrictive indeed. So we're going to look at some of those in a future study, but not today. All right. But just to give you a flavour, all right, they're expected to live their lives in just the same way as any other monk of any other order did, but monks of other orders didn't have to go on horseback, learn lances, swords, and all of that sort of stuff, did they? So they had a doubly, if not trebly, difficult life. But as a monks, the monk side of it, their life would be like, well, they would have to go into daily devotions. They had their specific chores to do that were not fighting related, but they were priory related. They went to regularly distribute alms and food to the poor. They weren't allowed any personal possessions. And their lives were totally regimented daily, even during their meals. Okay. Now, the idea was that they were to lead a life that was completely dedicated to Christ in every conceivable way. Okay. Now, I want to talk about how you got to join the Templars in the first place. I'm talking about the original Templars, by the way. Don't forget, we're not talking about Templars today. We're talking about 12th century, 12th and 13th century men joining the Templars. All right? So that wasn't something for the faint of heart, I can tell you. All right? Now, sometimes you would get the rich nobles. They would often send their sons to become Templars. Some of them got through, some of them didn't. And they had the advantage to some extent of having had maybe some proper sword training because they come from a noble family or what have you. And that was to their advantage. They had some understanding of rank structure to some degree, or they may have served in a local army or whatever. Okay, there's all of that going on. But the thing is, once you enter, you forget your status. Your status means nothing. It's just the training and the experience that you've had that can help. Right. Now, of course, the peasant would need to show significant skills and determination to be able to get into the Knights Templar. So not everybody could get in. If you've got a gentleman who's a young man, shall we say, who's been wrestling bulls for a living, or doing stuff that was incredibly physical, yeah, maybe he might be able to blag his way in. It's all down to the Master at Arms. He decides, he looks at all these people and think, are they going to be able to go through the training? Do they have what it takes to join this elite band of warriors? So, just as in the present day today, if you want to be in the SAS, you've got to have had a lot of training and some other stuff, okay? In the same manner, not the same type of training, obviously, but in the same manner. Previous experience is important. Have you been in a battle, they might ask? And who did you serve? What rank were you? What did you do? Were you wounded? Blah, blah, blah. Abilities would need to be tested. So if you say that you've been a soldier, well, they're going to test you and find out what you can do. Because what you're going to learn to do as a Templar is going to be a darn sight better and more in depth than anything you've done before. We're talking about medieval special forces now. Okay? Right, so there's going to be fighting involved, right? Whatever happens, you can't avoid it. If you want to try and join the Templars of old, you're going to have to show your mettle, right? So probably after you've had a severe beating, the Master at Arms is, and maybe a senior knight might be along for the ride, they're going to evaluate your potential. So that's your fighting skills. What about your faith? I mean, after all, that should be, isn't it, the mainstay of your service as a future Templar, right? You're going to be a monk. You're applying to become a monk. Well, they didn't have written exams or Bible studies to do. Confessions of faith, however, could take the form of, reciting something like the Apostles' Creed. And believe it or not, in later centuries, Christians were expected to learn 120-something questions of the Heidelberg Catechism. Questions and the answers. But that's not for Templars, okay? In the end, what it boils down to is their performance during their initial training would show if they had the right stuff. Okay? Now, that's the soldier of old, all right, the original Templars. Let's have a look at today's soldier of Christ, shall we? Obviously things are different today, aren't they? You're not expected to be a trained killer, please, or anything like that. However, if you've taken a bit of a look at the dedication and the skill and the courage needed to become an original knight, as I've just been saying, well, it makes sense that we've got to ask our knights to embody a sense of strength of character and use of a similar mindset. Okay, similar, not the same. Now, in the introductory video, I spoke about, the 3 priorities. I told you I was going to repeat them. Here they are again. You need to be able to follow these 3 principles. They are primary. That's why I've called them primary roles. 1, you must have. Primary role number 1, we're here to firstly and foremostly to be visible and audible proponents for Christ. That's number one. Number two, to aid and assist all calls from our brothers and sisters in Christ. Okay? Next one, third one, to aid, assist where applicable, and defend both fellow brethren and or others who are destitute or helpless. That's number three. Now, if we're truly knights, then we must each always have these points uppermost in our thinking. I'm going to deal about responsibilities in a later video, but for now, I just want you to take on board the simple fact that as a Templar Knight in our church, you will be expected to fulfill your duties and responsibilities in the manner of being a knight or a dame. Okay? And I'm not talking about the extra responsibilities like of being in charge of a commandery. That's something separate. Just those responsibilities that are expected of everyone, based on the primary roles that I've just discussed, and your behaviour and your adherence to God's laws also. Now, this is where we differ from an ordinary church. Other churches encourage people, to become involved in the life of the church, and so do we. But few people do, don't they? They're just pew sitters, and then they go home again until next week, or a fortnight, or maybe next week, or next month maybe I'll go to church. That pew sitters, they don't do anything for the church. In the Knights Templar Church, it is fully expected that every knighted person will actively, willingly, and sacrificially engage in some distinct area of our church life, irrespective of any involvement that you might have with your local community or church where you live. Now, just one more thing to say today, and that's a quick word about command structure. Now, as a knight of the Priory, you're going to be expected to follow orders. So this is another major difference between Knights Templar Church and any other church. In other churches, they're not expected. The pastor doesn't say, do this and expect it to be done. They say, can you do this, please? And it might get done, in time, possibly. So there's a difference, isn't there? Now, we're going to talk more about church and priory structure a bit later on. But for now, I just want you to appreciate that Knights of the Priory are expected to respond appropriately with respect to all, but, also with obedience to authority, recognition of the authority or the rank structure, as it were. Okay, so that's all I want to say for today. Rewatch the video, read through the stuff that I've been telling you about today. You can download it, as I said before, on your course. Okay, so see you next time when we'll talk about the structure of the church and the priory. Bye for now.